Hola, ¿cómo estamos? I'm Elia, and welcome to the 8th episode of Hable con Elia. This is a new video podcast in which I invite members of the artistic community from around the globe with the objective of having an open dialogue and getting to know more about their art, life, and mindset. You can listen to us live via Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. But if you can't make it to the live broadcast, just know that you can listen to the recording on all imaginable streaming platforms. I have the great pleasure today to introduce to you all Seattle-based multi-instrumentalist, composer, producer, and sound artist, Jonathan Warman. Jonathan, it's so great to have you here today during this rainy Pacific Northwest afternoon. How's it going?
Very good, thank you. So pleased to be here.
That's awesome. Great to have you here too. So I liked starting these conversations with getting to know a little bit more about your past, where you grew up, and we'll dive into that. So are you Seattle based? Are you a true Seattleite or?
I've been in Seattle for, I think 15 or 16 years now.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit longer. So I think that might consider me,
I think so.
Like a legit Seattle person.
Yeah.
And just before that, I was living in the Skagit Valley, Whatcom County area.
Nice.
And I grew up in the Skagit Valley, and my early years with music was primarily in Anacortes and Bellingham, and playing in some of the local bands and creating the scene sort of there. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, and Seattle was never, when I moved here, it was something very familiar already, because a lot of what I loved and a lot of the people around me loved was not where we lived immediately. So we were coming to Seattle on a weekly basis to experience all of the art or music or the scene that we were, trying to be a part of. And then, we'd run back home to Anacortes or whatever to kind of recreate it, if you will.
Wow.
So Seattle's always been sort of a big focus in my life. Yeah.
Very cool. And very similar to Kurt Cobain in that case.
Maybe. Yeah.
The same area where he was born and eventually became such a rock superstar. What were some of the bands that you played with when you were there? Because I know that you've toured a lot with other bands also from there.
Yeah.
I know that you played with The Head and the Heart, as well as some other local bands. But what type of music did you start with, and what kind of some of the first genres that you started experimenting?
So the very first band that I was in, it was like a sort of a Jimmy Eat World, early Jimmy Eat World, nice. Sort of Dashboard Confessional, okay. Sort of inspired band. It was very, very young, coming out of high school, and it was called Beryl Addison. It's okay. Really funny to say that out loud. That was my very first go at it, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then for my senior project in high school, I made a record. I made a CD, like a 5-song EP.
That's so cool.
That process made me very curious about many things. And I started to sort of make records for other people in the back of a church that was located in Mount Vernon that had some equipment. Mm-hmm. And this is just out of high school. And one of the people who I made a record with, his name is John Van Dusen, and we made this really super fun record together. And it was like my first I felt like it was my first real record. And out of that came a band called The Lonely Forest that we put together and made many, many records and played lots of shows and did lots of really amazing, fun things. And that was like my first, I think, real experience with playing in a band and the scene and things like that. So that was like the first band that I was really ever in that did anything serious, if you will.
Yeah.
And then in and around that, I was playing in and out of different groups in and around the area. And through that, I was exposed to a lot of people in Seattle and eventually made my way here to pursue more record making, actually, and working in studios.
Which studios did you start working at?
Primarily, Orbit Audio was the first place that
Yeah.
I really started working out of. And, that's where I learned how to load a reel of tape into a Studer 800. And I worked on a Trident 80B series console. That's where I kind of learned signal flow and how consoles and lots of old vintage gear worked. And that's sort of where I cut my teeth, I guess. And then in around there, I ended up just being in every single room in Seattle. But that's sort of like where I got my start. Because when I first moved to Seattle, I was working at Emerald City Guitars when I was just a kid. I was a kid back then.
That's so cool.
And I lived in the OK Hotel, which was right around the corner from Emerald City Guitars. And then
in Pioneer Square.
Yeah, in Pioneer Square. And then right around the corner from that was Orbit Audio. And so that was like my little trifecta.
Yeah.
Recording studio, Emerald City Guitars, and then my little tiny apartment overlooking Elliott Bay and in the OK Hotel. Amazing. Which, going back to Kurt Cobain, you mentioned earlier, I think that's the first place they played Smells Like Teen Spirit was at the OK Hotel when it was a venue, like back in the day. Yeah.
So before it was a hotel, it was a venue, or was it
I believe
they had the venue and
it was a venue and a diner. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was a venue, and then it was a diner, and then it got closed down, and then they turned it into affordable housing, and that's when I lived there. So
what an experience! That's so cool because it's, I mean, the Pioneer Square is really, I mean, it really, I think of it as the heart of Seattle because that's really where everything, everything started. From an architecture standpoint, like how was it living at the time there? Like, obviously, you were able to go to Emerald City Guitars right there, but how was that area at the time that you lived there? Was it?
Well, I lived there for over 12 years, 11 or 12 years. So I clearly liked it a lot. I was drawn there because you mentioned the architecture. I was drawn there because of the buildings. Yeah. They were very old and beautiful, and I was drawn to the loft lifestyle. So I lived in the OK Hotel for like a year and a half or 2 years, and then moved one block away into a giant 1,500 square foot open loft space with big giant windows, and that's where I lived for the next like almost 10 years, and had a little studio in there.
That's so cool.
And I would bounce back and forth between there and Orbit. And then I didn't work at Emerald City Guitars after I moved into that place. But it was great. I loved that area of town. It was really fun and never a dull moment at all.
Oh, I bet.
It's Pioneer Square and Pike Place Market. And it was fun, too, because there was no grocery stores down there. And so you were forced to go shopping in Pike Place Market.
That's so beautiful. That's such a wonderful experience.
It was like a postcard.
Yeah, and how it is in many other countries. You have the local marketplace, which is where you buy your groceries, your vegetables, your protein, your milk.
You buy food every 2 or 3 days.
Exactly.
Which I do miss, actually.
I had the great opportunity to live in Europe for some years, and that's really the mindset too. You just buy your daily groceries at the local market, and that's just really the custom. And there's something really nice about that. I think that's, obviously now, we both have kids and we have a family, and there's a benefit to doing a long-term shopping
once a week
spree, but there's something very, very, very special about that day to day, because you're part of the community. You're part of the movement. You're there, and experiencing that on a daily basis.
Yeah, the fish guy, the meat guy.
Yeah, exactly.
The people at Le Pichet or whatever who are going to give you the leftover baguettes.
Exactly.
So, because you're poor and can barely even buy the fish from the fish guy.
Yeah, no, there's something really special about that, and I think it's cool that you had that experience, especially in Seattle, which is such a picturesque city too, and with everything that it has.
Yeah, totally beautiful living down there. And if we didn't have kids, actually it's funny. I had this conversation earlier today. Someone asked me where I'd probably be living if I didn't have kids. And, I said, if it was just my wife and I would probably live in a really, one of those cute lofts on the waterfront in Pike Place Market.
Especially now, I mean, there are quite a lot of those old buildings that are still servicing the loft experience, and now without the viaduct, it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's so gorgeous. I'm sure real estate's gotten really expensive.
I can't even imagine. I know after I moved out of my space that I was in for 10 years, I was paying, when I first moved in there, it was $800 a month. When I moved out, I think it was 12. That was over a 10-year period. And I remember following up with the landlord, and it went from $1,200 to $5,000 a month with the next tenant.
That's insane. I'm not surprised, but that's insane.
Yeah, and it was a little bit of it was a startup company, I think, and they did really minor renovations to the space. But it was just wild. But I love living down there, and we live less than a mile away from there. We're still very much almost downtown. And it has its challenges, as we were talking about earlier.
Of course.
But it's, we can go up on our balcony and our deck, and we can see Lake Washington one way, and then we can look the other way and see Elliott Bay. And it's just beautiful over here.
That's gorgeous. Totally beautiful. Especially in the spring and summertime, I'm sure you're taking advantage of the beautiful sunsets.
Planting lots of flowers and drinking lots of wine.
Nice. I like that. Same here. Same here. So what do you still own a guitar? Were you able to purchase a guitar or buy a special guitar from your time at Emerald City?
Oh man,
you still have?
I've got so much shit.
Nice. Any one in particular that just comes to mind from the time that you were there and that you were able to acquire?
I'm looking behind me. I have so much stuff surrounding me, and you can't see in the camera angle, but to my left and to my right, and then everything. There's like just heaps and heaps of stuff, and there's heaps of gear that aren't in this room. This is my COVID studio, currently.
Nice.
The basement of my house, and it goes from this room into my. We have like a smaller living room here. So I have the piano and some other stuff in there, but. From Emerald City, I acquired so many cool things.
I'm sure you did.
I don't want to go pick it out, but I have lots of little amplifiers from the 1950s.
Very
and 60s,
cool.
Little Supro Tremo verbs and Ampeg reverber rockets and 1960s little Vox AC-15s and tons and tons and tons of
so cool.
Little amps that sound huge.
Yeah.
I'm looking, this was one of like my first cool guitars. I'll grab it off the wall.
Yeah.
And I used this. I toured with this bass a lot.
Nice.
Made a lot of records with this bass.
P-bass?
1974 P-bass. It came into Emerald City Guitars in 2 pieces with no frets on it. And then Eric Daw actually refretted it and put it back together. And normally, I feel personally like a lot of the 70s basses are sort of heavy, in my opinion. This one feels like it's like very, very light. It's absurdly light and very,
which is a good thing for touring.
Yes. It's so
how come
light. I don't know why. It's one of the lightest 70s basses I've ever felt. And I've had this thing. I don't even know, like 12 years or something.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I got it for nothing, absolutely nothing.
I'm glad.
And all those little amps are cool. And then shout out to Eric Daw.
Nice. Yeah.
Custom guitars. So this was. Oh, here, let me grab this one too. So when I was younger and I was living in a van and a suitcase, these were my touring guitars.
Oh, beautiful. Those tellies are
Eric Daw made. I've had some vintage Fenders, and I regretfully did get rid of them. When
it happened.
Really young and poor, and
I've had to sell some P basses too.
Trying to figure out how to live, I have sold off a lot of gear, but
sure.
both guitars have what's really cool is he put 5-way pickups in them, or 5-way switches. And so you have your bridge, and then you're out of phase, so like a Strat, and then your standard bridge and neck, and then it's wired like a humbucker, and then all the way up is just the bridge. And these things are just feather lights, and he does all of the. Well, this one is actually naturally worn quite a bit because I toured with it for, I mean, eight years or something almost. Wow. So that's cool. There's just, I don't know, lots of odds and ends here.
Right.
I have less of I've been way less focused on guitar because I've started to make orchestral music, which is really bizarre. Right. And we could talk about it a little bit, but yeah, Emerald City Guitars was cool because I learned a lot about gear. And it was interesting because I was working at that studio that had a lot of vintage gear, and the owner was he loved recording to tape. And so I learned all about how to engineer and work on tape and how to cut tape and edit. And then I was at Emerald City Guitars where there was just this huge focus on vintage gear. And so I was able to understand, what good tone was and all of the subtleties of different circuits and amps and a brown face versus black face versus silver face, and just all those weird little boutique companies and how actually awesome they were. And so being exposed to all of that I'm really grateful for, because I think it really helped me create a sort of a unique palette early on of sounds and tones. And so I'm really, really quite thankful for all of that.
And also the appreciation of gear, because gear that was made, in the 70s and 80s, obviously it's not made the same way. And there's just something very special about not just the materials they use to make them, but ultimately the outcome. Like you get different sounds, you get different, different details, different, and understanding those from I'm sure it benefited, and obviously that's been the case as you mentioned. How has that changed with you in your process now, where we are focusing more on the digital and the emulation of sound? What's your process with? I'm sure you like both, but what's kind of your process now, and what's your mindset about that change?
Well, I don't do the rock and roll thing as much anymore. So, which I get sad about sometimes. And to answer your question, so what's interesting too is, like, early on, I did like this big spell of touring, right? So playing in Seattle bands, some bands in LA, some bands in New York City. There seemed to be more bands touring from those two cities than in Seattle typically. But I did hop around in some bands here. Fences, I played in for a long time and met some great friends in that band. And we toured with Head in the Heart and Against Me, and just tons of really awesome big US tours. Really fun being exposed to Lollapalooza and Bonnaroo and these big festivals through that. And all along the way, I was kind of getting tired of it all. But so I don't do a lot of the rock and roll stuff as much anymore. But what's weird is I do a lot of orchestral work primarily now, and it's totally intertwined in being in the box and out of the box. So I do use guitars a lot. And so I'm composing a soundtrack for a game currently. And one of the characters, the theme, I'll have to send it to you so you can play it as an underscore maybe, because it's really, really cool. The theme of the character is Asian, spaghetti Western, and pirate. So how do you combine all these different sounds together?
Right.
So the point is, though, I don't have a lot of access to string players immediately, especially during COVID in here. Right. But what was cool is I used a lot of virtual instruments. But then when it came to the guitar and a lot of the percussion and the drums, I actually just grabbed one of those tellies, plugged it into a 1963 Supro, cranked up the reverb, stuck a ribbon mic in front of it, and just started playing these sort of spaghetti Western guitar lines.
I love that.
And then let that sit with the strings, and then overdubbed a bunch of hand percussion. And it's so interesting. Like you build these out, and I tracked some in the box, percussion and guitar, and immediately taking them out and adding the ones that actually have like a human touch to them, that aren't perfect loops and all that. I mean, it totally just changed the song immediately. Having air moving through a room into a microphone and then into a song, capturing an actual stereo image with human imperfections, while being influenced by everything else, it just adds so much, so many positive things. And so consistently, I will do a mixture of both. If I can do it myself, I will pick up an instrument and I will do it. So yeah, I try to do that on a daily basis if I can. Or what I do a lot of times is, for the soundtrack, for example, if I sketch, I'll do a sketch of a piece. It might take me 2 days to sketch out one piece. And then if it gets approved, then I'll go back and start overdubbing like actual takes of me performing things.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then when I do commercial work, which I do quite a bit of, if I was to be completely honest, I'm not super excited to say it, but because the turnaround times are so fast and you have to edit and revise potentially so many times, I actually keep almost everything in the box. Nice. Because you just have to crank out like song after song after song, and you don't know how many revisions you're going to have to do. So it's just easier to keep it all, I guess, fake, you could say.
Do you work better under pressure, or do you work better having your own schedule and vision of how that? I'm sure it's different, obviously, and different industry too. But
yeah, it's a little bit of both. I'm writing my first like real soundtrack right now, and it's been a very interesting journey. And there are moments where when I have to hit a deadline and turn in X amount of minutes for my 2 week, every 2 weeks I have to hit X amount of minutes. There are times where the pressure does really help, and something just happens like last minute. I have no idea why or how. And then there's other times where, I can, and yesterday was a really good example of it. I sketched out like a little piece of music 2 nights ago with my daughter sitting on my lap. And then I went back to it yesterday and just basically turned it into a really, really strong 2.5 minute demo.
That's so cool.
That will probably get approved with a couple revisions, but it just sort of fell out. Now, every now and then I hit a character or a style of music that I do have a hard time with, and so I have to kind of work around it and learn a lot. There's a learning curve. I've been writing a lot of Persian music and Eastern music and a lot of world music. And so I've been challenged a lot to rethink and learn a lot about new instruments, many of which are real instruments in and around the space, which I don't think you can see on camera, and some that are, a lot of them are virtual, unfortunately, but it's been, an interesting experience, because the game is in an intergalactic marketplace, and it's very Middle Eastern influenced in a lot of ways, thematically and visually, but it's also theoretically in this crazy planet in space, and there's all these crazy characters, and there is no like real set sound. And so
That's amazing.
creating, you know, this intergalactic marketplace. It's like, oh, what does this sound like? Well, it sounds like a lot of world music, a lot of traditional
Right.
orchestral elements, and a lot of synthesizers and different
Mhm.
things. So it's all across the board. Yeah, it's been really, really crazy.
When did you? Is it okay for me to mention the name, the
Oh
game?
yeah, yeah, sure, yeah,
It's called the Bazaar, right? The Bazaar
yeah, yeah,
game. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
When did you start working on it, and what's kind of the timeline of when the game will be launched? And
Yeah. So the game, I've been working on it for about a year now. I've been involved a little bit longer than that, but I haven't been
sure,
writing for it the
sure.
entire time. And of course, it's totally changed and evolved along the way.
Hmm.
You know, like when I pitched myself and was, you know, looking at the creative, I thought that it would remain sort of in this Middle Eastern sort of theme,
Hmm.
and stylistically, musically, right? And it turns out then you meet the team and you meet the creative director, and then
Right.
you start seeing all these characters and these different worlds, and it's kind of like, oh man, it's none of that. And so I I had this idea that I was going to be really heavily focused on writing a lot of Middle Eastern music and just Persian music. And while that's an important element to it, it is so far and wide, like tons of synths, tons of big orchestral moments, a
Hmm.
lot of like really interesting ambient stuff I started incorporating into it
Nice.
as of recently. So, which is fascinating because I love creating that on my own.
That's your thing, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's your sound too,
yeah,
right?
I love it. And so now that's slowly entering into the game in a lot of ways. And what's really nice about it is it feels natural and not like I'm forcing my own thing into it. Like it works really well with where it's landing right now. And so that's really encouraging. And it's been getting good feedback too from the team. So
That's fascinating. That's
yeah,
so cool to be part of the whole composition of a game. Were you a gamer growing up?
no, not at all.
No, not at all.
No, not at all. But I love how audio and music can play such big roles in so many different experiences, whether
It's a big part of the experience.
it's
It's a
huge.
big part of the experience.
It's
Yeah.
huge. It's huge. Whether you're using your phone
Yeah.
and you hear an alert sound and the haptics, you know, make your hand vibrate a little bit, and you get that sense of like, oh, I just felt that sound and I heard it and that's amazing. Or it's a full on soundtrack in a film or in a game. How does it complement and
Yeah.
lift the experience for everybody, like taking it in?
Yeah.
I think that's such a fascinating role to have, and so much thought goes into it. I'm just shocked, and I've kind of been in and around it for a little bit. Earlier, I think you mentioned, you know, being at Microsoft and focusing on how audio and music is used in content and devices and sounds, and there are people thinking about it, and so it's been a real honor to be entrusted with writing a soundtrack for a franchise.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's going to be replicated in so many times. You know, it's so great that you're talking about this. I just watched a very short I guess special mini documentary. I don't know, about the sound in devices, and you know and there's this interview they're doing with the guy um, that composed some of the uh, sounds for Apple, in particular the when you turn on the device, ding, you know, and he's talking about how he created it, and you know, he showed even the keyboard that he used for that. But it was so cool because he was talking. It's fun. Unfortunately, he doesn't get any royalty because apparently, like you
yeah,
know, that
no,
time flew by, and he was like, go or something, and he kind of lost his chance to get. And he kind of like, you know, doesn't care much about it, but or maybe he does. I don't know. But the really cool thing that he talked about was that that sound apparently that sound wasn't approved,
Yeah,
but he found a way, like a loophole within to just get it in.
yeah,
And I just love that he hijacked the system,
yeah,
and it was
yeah.
like, it's gonna go in. I don't care what's gonna happen to me. And
Now,
ultimately it did. It did. And it's such a such a memorable sound. But then the other thing was interesting where he talked about how now the devices don't have the sound.
yep, yeah.
And I realized that too. And I don't know what your perspective is, or what's the first thing that comes to mind, but I feel like that's such a terrible decision, because I mean, obviously we have the whole commercial apparatus, which is Apple, and it's just such a such a monster of a company. But if it has given something to these devices, it's this life, this spark, this almost like a spiritual, like like the device is awake, and to remove that experience from the user just because probably they received a bunch of complaints. I don't know the reasoning why, but I thought it was atrocious that they would decide not to have that. What's your take
Well,
on that?
I believe they did remove it from the startup. I think
Mm-hmm.
is that correct? They did remove
Yeah,
it.
my MacBook Air doesn't make that.
Yeah, I
I have a
believe
new
that
one.
was they did remove it. So you know what's funny? Microsoft did the same thing. I don't remember exactly which version of Windows, but I have had the pleasure to know and have a bit of a mentor relationship with the senior sound designer who created the last big push of all of
Okay.
the Windows sound design
Mm-hmm.
sounds and alerts and elements. And he took out the super iconic startup sound for
Right.
Windows.
Right.
And he talked to me a lot about how they came to that decision and how it came about, which is basically, if I remember correctly, and Matt, if you're listening, let me know and I'll correct myself. But he talked a lot about how we're surrounded by so much noise pollution. There's just so many sounds. There's so many things going on all the time. And the idea is to be very, 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 very intentional with alert sounds and product sounds. And so, if I remember correctly, he took many sounds out of
Mm-hmm.
the big Windows push that they did. I think he took out the trash, the startup,
Right.
tons of different alerts. He removed tons, and I think it took a lot of people by shock in the company. But it was all about this sort of rebrand and also just making things super intentional.
I feel like in the exercise of I think I understand, also because I work in tech, and I understand that it does have an impact, and maybe the ultimate outcome to be more minimalist and also to make less distractions. It is a good point that there is a lot of not just noise but visual pollution out there, um but I also feel like it's removing a big part of the identity
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
of these devices,
Yeah.
which we use on a regular basis. Um, and I feel like, as much as I understand that point, I also feel like, what's going to happen next? Like, are we not going to have, like, are we eliminating sound from from everything?
I don't know what's going to happen next, but
Yeah.
I do firmly believe that there should be a lot more people thinking about how it can be used intentionally, and how it can live in our lives at a higher level. And I think there are a few companies doing that, and I
Mm-hmm.
know that they're working on things that aren't necessarily public yet.
Sure.
Um, and I know, unfortunately, some have scaled back a lot. I don't want to say name names because I have
Sure.
friends who are audio leads
Sure.
or designers at some of these companies, and it's interesting to get a pulse on what's happening internally and how people are thinking. Well, how could this little bit of music, how could this little piece of sound, change the experience? It's fascinating to see. But
Yeah.
I do see a lot more things around the corner, especially in the home device space,
Yeah.
which is not public yet. There's some interesting things going on.
Yeah, and I hear that, and I just feel like it's also, they have so much power over the experience, and that
Mhm.
experience if you remove a sound, that's also it's a generational thing, I guess, too. Like
It
I grew
is.
up I grew up turning on Windows 95, and I remember the sound, and it's like, as I
Yep.
do remember also connecting to
Yeah.
broadband, and
Oh yeah.
the memorizing the whole.
The squeaks and clocks. I remember
um,
that too. Holy crap.
but I don't know, maybe it's just that I have this relationship with music that I actually do appreciate it. I like it.
Well, I think.
um
Well,
I don't know, like it's not that it affects me and I'm gonna, but it's what alarms me is just it's they have so much power on the experience and ultimately on how people are perceiving these things, and removing some of these experience, I don't know if in the long term that's a good thing. I don't know. I guess we'll see.
well,
I also don't know, to what degree on a psychological level this changes things.
yeah,
But
yeah.
maybe it's me just being very, like, I actually do appreciate it, and I.
Well, you appreciate it the same way I appreciate it too, I think, because I do believe it's terribly important getting in and out of your car. What kind of sound does that make?
Yeah.
Turning your mobile on, sending an email out, waking up in the morning, listening to music, all of these interactions do account for something. And I think that it's incredibly powerful to think
Yeah.
about. Um, I don't know. I'm sure there's a little
We'll
bit of
see.
nostalgia attached to it too, though. So,
Or maybe they'll come back with it 10 years later. It's like,
yeah,
hey, like, remember this?
absolutely.
Who knows?
It's
Um,
Yeah, technology and sound and music is a fascinating
Very
space.
fascinating. Very fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
weird.
all the thought that's being put
Oh,
in,
yeah.
in consideration when these changes happen is also very interesting. I would
Yep.
love to participate in a meeting, just be like a fly in one of those meetings with, like, like, we're going to remove the sound. It's like, oh, bzz, like.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I will say though, so I was for one of the jobs I've been doing
Mhm.
the last few months. I've been working with Microsoft as I don't know exactly what my role would be called, as an audio design
Mhm.
lead or creative, and I've been creating this big giant music package for their digital events.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so with that comes all these different branding iterations of different themes.
Mhm.
And then, since everything is in the digital space, everything is this webcast now. And so one of the things I've been trying to do in this project is take like some of these UX audio design things and interject them into like the webcast,
Mhm.
and all of those alerts and assets are actually created and pulled from all of the music pieces that we created for this broadcast package, right? So you have like an intro or a stinger or something that runs with lower thirds,
Right.
and I actually pulled and created all of the alerts and audio design from those, so they're all sort of branded and cohesive, but letting you know that people are thinking about how to make really cool audio and musical moments happen still, in ways you might not expect,
Yeah.
but still,
That's very cool.
lift that sort of experience. And how can we make this webcast more connected and more
Mhm.
productive for the people who are participating? And
Right.
so that's been a fun experience for me to be like a designer and try to lead that in like productive ways that make sense. So
Yeah. Very cool. And thanks for sharing that.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
definitely encouraging also to hear that. I mean, there's so much stuff that's being considered for, so many different future projects at so many of these tech companies. And it's always fascinating. I ultimately I try to digest all of it and really appreciate the stuff that they're doing as well.
yeah. There's a lot
Um,
to digest though.
let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about your, your music. I know that you released a new single, Repose,
Yes.
not so
Yeah.
long ago, which is fantastic. I also love all the I love all the video work that's done for your music,
Oh, thanks.
which is very, I think, very also symbolic with the Pacific Northwest, the picturesque Pacific Northwest landscapes. And but tell me more about your. I know that obviously you're focused right now on the soundtrack for the game, but it seems like you're still releasing your singles and your
Yes.
music.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love to hear more about who are your influences. Like when did you start working on more ambient music? Was it by accident? Did you hear other ambient music growing up that you're like, this is really my jam, this is my thing? Tell me more about that. I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Yeah. So it's so funny, I have to say too, because I just released these things that I've been releasing over the last 2 years.
Hmm.
It's the first time I ever released any music under my name or for myself or by
Right,
myself.
right,
And I've made, I don't even know how many records. And I've always played music, but it was always for someone else or
right.
someone else's music.
Hmm.
I was mixing someone else's record or producing this, but I never did anything for myself until just recently. And I've always been interested in ambient music. Harold Budd and Brian Eno were really early things that I was exposed to
Hmm.
that really sparked a very, very heavy interest. Um, and this might not be considered ambient, but I think it sort of makes sense. But I remember being very young, and I think it was the first or second Sigur Rós record that came out.
Yeah, that's great.
And I was so moved by that for some reason. And I mean, I was a teenager then, and I remember just falling in love with that record and having no idea what that
What they were
guy was
saying.
thinking.
Yeah.
But it
Oh,
moved
it's such a
me.
great
It
band.
moved me, and it was
Yep.
so beautiful. And the soundscapes and the textures and how they all intertwined. I just thought that was so incredible. And I had always played. What's interesting is I was kind of like a very crummy guitar player, but I
Hmm.
always played the pedals really well. And stylistically, part of my playing was creating these really sort of big textural moments, if that makes
Hmm.
any sense.
Yep.
So very simple parts, but they sounded really interesting. And I always played in stereo so I could create
Right.
even bigger sonic landscapes of just
Right.
like beautiful walls of sound, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so because of that, I was always sort of experimenting with lots of ambient style music and lots of, tape looping and delays and space
Hmm.
echoes and
Hmm.
fun stuff like that. And I was always experimenting with it. And I never really did anything with it or put it to use until my son, we had our first kid, and he was having a really hard time sleeping. And so, and of course, you would play these like nature loops on
Uh-huh.
Spotify,
Right.
but a lot of the times they'd only be like 2 minutes long, and then it would kind of skip and start to a new one.
Right.
And there was this disruption in like the peacefulness of it,
Right.
and that bothered me so much. And so what I did was I made this like 40-minute freaking like
Loop.
4-song EP,
Yeah.
and each song was like 10, almost 10 minutes each or something, just unbelievable. But I
Hmm.
made that so he could sleep to it.
Love that.
And it was just lots of textural ambience, and there's a lot of orchestral sort of elements, like really subtly bubbling in the background.
Hmm.
And I made that for him to sleep to. And then I thought, just for fun, well, I'll just release it. And that was the first thing I ever released
That's so
under
cool.
my name.
I
And of
love that.
course, thank you. And I wish I would have done a little bit more production to it. I wish I would have slammed it through a couple pieces of rack gear, but
Right.
that's okay. Next time around. And so that was the first time I ever released anything, and it was oddly like really well received. for, just putting it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then some real sweet folks in Australia hit me up and asked me if I wanted to start releasing music with them. And they have a little label called Echoes in the Valley. And so I work with them releasing different ambient influence tracks now on the regular. And it's something I'm committed to keep doing, because while I write music for a full-time job,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just totally music focused, I want to make sure I'm having fun musically too, and doing things with myself.
And
so
have a musical escape too, from.
yeah, exactly. And so those are creative exercises where I can just kind of do almost whatever I want to, because we do try to keep a theme for each record that we put out.
Right.
And I can just sort of be myself, and I can just sort of have fun and be experiment. So cool. Experiment. And I love simplistic piano and sonic landscapes of just lushness.
Yeah.
Just beautiful, lush sounds. I don't know. There's something to it that's just special for whatever reason.
Yeah, it just come to mind. I've been following Rick Rubin on his single posts, which I love. I love that he deletes them too, because they make them more. It makes it more meaningful, and I get that, and I really do. Like, I really appreciate it that and I like the one that he did. I think it was today. Through expression, we meet ourselves.
Oh yeah.
And I that came to mind when you were telling me about that. Being able to express yourself, because it's hard. When you. I mean, I've worked with many producers that also have their personal projects, and it's hard. It's hard to focus on your own stuff, but to be able to have that freedom, and also this, just, it seems like it's easy for you to just go to your comfort zone, and ambient is that. I have wanted to share two things based on what you're saying. I actually have Sigur Ros's drummer's drumsticks.
Oh, cool.
When I saw them, I was living in Rome in Italy at the time.
Oh, wow.
I saw them play live. I was such a fan of Sigur Rós. I was like 17. I don't know who introduced me to Sigur Rós. It might have been one of my older brothers. I realized that's pretty cool that I was listening to Sigur Rós at 17 or 16.
Yeah.
And they're touring in Europe, and they were playing in Rome, and I went with a friend, with my good friend Ahmed, who we had a garage rock band. That was actually my first, my second, but very, very real, garage rock band experience. And we had a band called Turnover. It was just the two of us, very White Stripes. And we went to the show, and it was just an amazing show. Obviously, I don't know if you actually have been able to see them live.
Yes, I have.
And towards the end, with the last song, the drummer was just banging the crap out of those drumsticks, just no mercy for the drumsticks. You just get new ones, keep throwing them. And so he massacred these drumsticks and threw them towards the ground. And I was on the first row, and I was like, that's mine. And I took them, and I was like, that's mine. I'm keeping it for. And I think I let go of that. I gave one of them to a good friend of mine. I think I gave one to my friend Ahmed. I might have forgotten. And then the other one I gave to another good friend who's a drummer and who loves Sigur Rós. And I was like, hey, this is a birthday gift for you. I like this idea of regifting things that you've had in the past that maybe have been sentimental to you, but it's okay, I can,
No, that's amazing. And
it was a wonderful experience. I mean, it was just
so I have to be honest and say that if I've ever had a spiritual experience, at a concert or something, it was them.
Yes.
I saw them on the Talk tour, I guess, at the Paramount Theater. And I saw them at Paramount Hall too, but at the Paramount Theater first. And
so cool.
I mean, it was just so moving.
It's so moving.
It's crazy. It's just crazy.
You cry. It's so emotional.
It's like a spiritual experience.
It really is a spiritual experience. It really touches your soul.
It's
very special. Yeah.
I have to. Okay. So I will say I've had an interaction with their drummer too once, much different, but
nice.
I will briefly tell the story. I was in Seattle, young, and a huge fan at this point.
Sure.
And I was at the 5 Point drinking, gin and tonics because with one of my ex-girlfriends, and her girlfriend was one of the bartenders, and so she would just sling us like freaking all night long, and it was, it cost nothing. And we were outside, I think having a cigarette or something, and I saw this dude with these crazy shoes on, and I tapped my girlfriend on the shoulder, and I was like, oh my God, look at that guy's shoes. Those are just ridiculous. They were like moon boots or just something totally outlandish.
Random, yeah.
Just like so crazy looking. And she was this sort of like fashionista, really cool girl. I was not nearly as cool as her. And she made clothing, and she was very into that stuff. And I thought these moon boot shoes looked outrageously ridiculous and poked fun at the guy. Anyway, she looks at them and she's like, those are amazing. Those boots are amazing. And then she goes up and starts talking to him. So then we're talking to them. And I was like, oh man, where are you from? You know, he had a very strong accent and didn't speak English super clearly. Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, I'm from Iceland. And immediately I was like, oh my God.
That's so cool.
And it ended up being the drummer,
right,
for Sigaros, and then he was there with the guy. I forgot all their names, but he was mixing front of house. So as a front of house engineer, another guy from the crew, the drummer, and like the bassist, I think. Anyway, they put us on the list when we saw them at Benaroya Hall, and it was totally amazing. And they were so fun and sweet. And
that's awesome.
We hung out with them at the 5 Point in like one of the grungiest, dirtiest bars in Seattle, just drinking heavily and chain smoking.
I love that happens, you know, when someone that because it's really special when you're, you know, I don't know if you feel the same way, but it seems like you do, given the experience you had. But I've also had, you know, been able to meet some other musicians that I look up to, and just feeling this sense of like, they're so cool, like, you know.
It's nice when they're way more down to earth than normal than you realize or think. And thank God I think it's probably happened more times than not. And working at Emerald City Guitars when I was younger, you know, every single band that was on tour came through, big or small, right? And if it wasn't, you know, the guys in the band, it was their crew that would come in and check stuff out for them, and I'm so thankful
for them.
yeah, exactly. Well, it was always like a really cool experience. It was always a good experience for the most part. There was only a couple bands that were just like, oh my God, just over you guys because you love yourself so much. They will remain unnamed. And it's funny because I think there's one or two that become friendly with them over the years after your career starts.
That's even better if you can actually establish your. I mean, that happened to me with Michael Lerner from Telekinesis.
I love that guy's
such a huge fan of his music, you know. And then obviously I moved to Seattle, and I was always like in my head, I always had this like with daydream, like it'd be so cool to meet Michael Lerner someday and play music with him. And it happened. It happened to me. You know, I met him at American Music in Fremont. I was incredibly nervous to see him. I was like, "That's him. That's, you know," and he's my age too. You know, and then I was like, I'm not gonna chat with him. Like I feel like I'm such like, and then I turned back and I went back to the car, and then I told my wife, Elia, I was like, Michael Lerner's in there. And he's like, did you take a picture with him? I was like, no. Did you talk with him? No. What are you doing? Go back. You're going to regret it for the rest of your life. You're such a fan of his. Like, and so I went back and I was like, you know, like the fanboy in me, like, hey, almost like Mr. Lerner, you know, like I'm such a fan of yours. I'm from Ecuador. Like, just want you to know that we listen to your music all the way over there.
Oh, that's so
and then
cool.
we just had a great conversation, and we got just like, he was incredibly friendly, obviously. And I decided at the time, I think we didn't have Instagram. So I found him on Facebook and I added him. I was like, I have nothing to lose. And he added me, and then we had and we just had a, you know, friendly relationship. And, you know, I would ask him for questions and then kind of like, you know, get his advice on things. And then when I was looking for drummers, I reached out to him. He's like, oh, you should probably maybe check out at the Seattle Drum School. You find some people there. And we had like small interactions here and there. but it really changed my life. And then eventually, I was also a huge fan of the work that Steven Aguilar did with The Head and the Heart and with other bands. And I was able to also meet him through a former colleague who was his roommate at the time. And eventually, long story short, I'm recording my first EP at Earwig Studio in 2014, back when it was in Soto. And I'm recording with Steven Aguilar, who I looked up to a lot. Amazing experience. And then I'm like, and he's like, hey, I have a good friend who might want to play drums for your tracks. Do you want me to ask him? I was like, who is he? It's like Michael Lerner. I'm like,
small world.
Small world. And so he came and he recorded the songs in like 4 hours. And then I did the Live at KXB show with him playing drums. Awesome. So dream come true. And that's probably the best and only thing that's of relevance or importance that I'll ever achieve in my life. And it was amazing. And it's, but going back to ambient music, I don't know if it happens to you. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to say, I always wanted to play in telekinesis.
Yes.
I always wanted to play those pop songs.
Yes,
I wanted to play bass with the distortion pedal and have super fuzzy guitars and just, I remember I asked him a bunch of times if I could be in his band, and I never got to, but some of my other friends did.
Right.
And I still, Michael, if you're listening, I love your songs. You have great pop songs. I want to play.
He's such a great, and he's so down to earth, and he's such a great artist. And I love everything he does. I'm such a big fan. One of the things another thing that's just crazy. Unfortunately, now with the pandemic, I haven't been able to go to as many record stores, but I've learned so much music from record stores. Like I go to a record store and I hear something and I'm just like, and I've learned so much about that from just going, whether when I lived in LA, when living in West Seattle, going to Easy Street Records. And one of my earliest experiences, I just moved to the States. We're getting married in LA. My wife is from LA originally. And then we were moving to Seattle because she was going to do her master's at CLU. And so we got married. And then we went, and Amoeba was like my I've always considered my second house, my second home when I'm in LA. I love going there. Obviously now they don't have the building anymore, and I've heard so much music just being there. And one of the things that I discovered, this was back in 2011, was, and I was actually trying to find through my CD collection, Tim Hecker. I don't know if you know him. And William Basinski.
I don't know William Basinski. Tim Hecker sounds so familiar.
And that's like my first ambient experience that I had, and I fell in love with it. I was like, this is my jam. And I wanted to mention that because with my daughter, to put her to sleep, I would put also ambient music.
Yeah.
So it was just a little thing that I wanted to share with you. And obviously, I got to put more of your music with my son.
Thank you.
But it's lovely to hear that, you have this experience through your life with your kids, and you're like, I'm just going to do it myself, and I'm going to create this, and it's going to serve a purpose. And I'm glad that you've released it, because I know friends that have done work for themselves and never release it. And I'm like, why are you doing that?
That's a really interesting thing too, because someone on Instagram reached out to me, someone who was really quite talented producer, and I was like, why are you asking questions to me? I want to ask questions to you. Right. Your stuff sounds so cool. But it was interesting, at the end of this conversation we had, I realized that, and I'm not sure what it is, if it's because I sort of write music, pretty much 90% of my work is writing music, whether it's for a commercial or a corporate element or a video game franchise. That is truly what I do, but I think through that, music in a way has become less precious, as in I just have to push so much into the world. And what that's, and I don't, saying less precious, I don't mean that in a negative way at all, because what's happened is now for me, because I don't think I would have ever released that ambient album that I made for my child if I hadn't have been making all of this music for all of these different things, because I was comfortable with allowing myself to be vulnerable and just push it out and let people experience. And I was always hiding from a lot of people, I think, musically, and never letting myself be out there. And so by ending up just randomly doing it in life so often, I'm finally able to just push my stuff out there, and I don't really think twice about it anymore.
Love that.
It's not this like thing I'm scared of or this precious little secret. I just make stuff and I just push it out.
I love that. That's
push it out the door. I want people just to hear it.
I love that, and I applaud you for that, because I know a lot of friends that are the opposite, and they're incredibly gifted, and you know, you were able to listen to their stuff, and then you're like, what are you going to do with this? Well, I don't want to do anything with it. I'm not going to release it. I'm like, so I feel like I've been in so many conversations where I'm trying to persuade friends that are, you know, artists or musicians that have these golden nuggets or just beautiful music and beautiful sentiment that has to be released to the world. So I think it's a great exercise. Do you think that it's also because you've matured? You're kind of at a different part of your life where it's just...
Oh, I'm certain that, I'm certain that definitely has something to do with it. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe, well, I definitely am not like, I'm definitely out of like the scene. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So I have very little holding me back to just be totally like, I'm not trying to be cool or impress anyone anymore.
That's my biggest criticism about a lot of scenes, but especially the Seattle scene, where that happens so much. And it's like, dude, it doesn't matter, you know, like,
it's a funny little pocket of
it is. It is.
And I certainly was wrapped up in that to a certain extent, and being free from that. And then also, maturing, you know, starting to work on big game franchises and creating sonic identities for large tech companies and stuff. And it's like, after you do all that, it's just like, I don't care about anything except for writing X amount of music this week, and then also making sure I'm delivering on all my projects. And then, you know, I just want to have fun now and make stuff, and there's nothing like getting in the way, or none of that silliness that came along with a lot of the rock and roll era of my musical past, which did get in the way of a lot of, I think, creativity and honesty and things like that, because your motives are different when your identity is sort of dependent or wrapped up in something that isn't as real as you think.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. You said it beautifully. And
like, with this maturity comes 100 times more honesty, I think. Yeah. And I'm really thankful for that, because I wasn't like that for a long time, truthfully.
Any plans on releasing more stuff this year?
Oh, yeah. So if I was to be completely honest, this game soundtrack is going to eat me alive through the rest of this year almost. Okay. We're going to try to, I think we're going to release the game in September of this year, so it'll hit the market. For context, I'm writing like less than 2 hours of music, but maybe an hour and a half of music. I'm writing a lot of music in a lot of different genres for it. So it is like my number one focus. It's also my first soundtrack, so I'm putting every single bit of energy into it that I can, because I'm hoping it will lead me to another like really big, cool franchise.
Cool.
But after that, what I'm really interested in doing is doing a full-length record of my own.
Nice.
That I just do for fun on my own time. And I'm really interested in going to, and I'm having a hard time with this because I have such a great accumulation of gear and tools at my disposal here. And so I'm having a hard time justifying some of this, but I'm interested in going just somewhere far away, totally unfamiliar, and working with one or two people who I know I can rely on musically a lot as like producer roles, and just creating an album really inspired by the location that I'm in. and not really having any expectations, and even going with hardly anything in mind, right?
I like
Musically.
that.
I just want to go and just create and just be influenced by the surroundings. So for example, I mean, go to Iceland or something, right? In the countryside, and
Nice. That's
just
beautiful. Yeah.
find a little studio somewhere and two guys or two people and team up and just be creative with
Right.
no expectations except for to be creative.
Right.
So I'd like to try to create an album like that next with no boundaries really, and in an unfamiliar place.
I like that. Yeah.
And so that's kind of my next thing, but truly I got to ship the game first.
Right. Right. So, but it seems like you want to stay with the kind of the gaming world too moving forward. You'd be interested in working in something similar to that.
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm just so blessed that I've been able to make so much music within like an actual job.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre. Now, of course, there was some really super low lows when I was younger and still touring, 8 months out of the year. But I'm just so pleased to be able to write for anything. So games, I happily write for television. I'm interested in doing some series work for maybe a streaming company or two. I'm actually maybe talking and trying to figure that out for another year and a half away, maybe something. I did just score part of a very beautiful Italian film.
Nice.
Which will be available, I think, in the coming months. I'm not actually entirely sure when it will be available to the public. So I would love to score like a large film or like a full-length film or something one day. I've never had the opportunity to do that, and I think that would be a really beautiful process and difficult one too. But there's certainly something really exciting about the game world because, like a film, but maybe even more. So you're creating just these new worlds, and it's so fun to be gifted the opportunity to just sort of create a new world sonically, right?
Yeah.
And its identity. It's very fun. I mean, I would just be pleased to write for anything ultimately, though. But yeah, I would love to do some more games and something with one of the streaming giants, preferably in the children's programming. Actually,
very cool.
Sort of.
There's so much there too.
Yeah,
yeah.
I have a very deep desire to. One of the reasons why I love doing this game and why I'm so interested in doing some more games is because I like the idea of my kids being able to be part of what I'm doing for work and creating this really interesting trifecta of, father, children, work, the craft, and everyone experiencing it. And it's cool because my kids have really inspired me to, write a lot of quirky, fun pieces for the game. And so the idea of doing some children's programming also is really like exciting, so they can enjoy it like on another level. Like that's just like a really fun side note. But yeah, just I'd like to write for anything.
That's awesome. I love that. I love to hear that, and thanks for sharing. How your personal life and I feel very much identified with that too. Like the music that I've done are for my kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
I take a lot of inspiration in that as well. Last question.
Oh yeah.
Before we go, do you wake up at night with an idea?
Yeah.
And if you do, what do you do?
Do you
go to like a voice note, or just go to down to the studio?
No, I come downstairs and I write. So
does that happen a lot?
Yeah, no,
I'm sure it does, because that's what you do. Yeah.
It happened the other night. So I posted it on my Instagram story.
Okay.
It was like 1:30 a.m.
Okay.
And I took a video of my daughter. So she did not sleep this week at all.
Okay.
She wasn't sleeping at all. And it's okay. And so my wife was finally like, "Oh my God, just take her downstairs."
Right.
And I was like, "Okay, I'll take her downstairs." So we came down to the studio.
I love it.
But like on the way down, I was kind of like mulling over this melody, and I was like, "Oh, you can kind of hear her right now in the background screaming, maybe." Anyway, I brought her down, and I just started writing out this melody, and she was just plopped down here on the floor playing with a bunch of percussion stuff.
Oh, that's so
And
great.
out of nowhere, I actually formed like an entire sort of demo / sketch of a tune, which I actually just finished off, and it's actually gonna be presented to the production and producing team for the game actually this next week.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I just walked down to the basement and hammer it out on the keyboard.
It's so beautiful that you're also letting your daughter participate at 1:30 in the morning with your music creation.
Yeah,
I love that.
There was no other way around.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it is sometimes.
Yeah, you have to be flexible.
But I love that. Yeah, that you're flexible. You're able to be flexible, because I know it's not always easy.
No, it's not.
But that's awesome. That's such a. I figured you would have these, midnight, early in the morning, sporadic ideas that come to mind.
Mostly at night, and I'm naturally a night owl. And
I was going to say that. Yeah, same here.
I usually go to bed around 2 or 3 every morning, so which is hard with the family stuff sometimes. But it's weird because my mind is just kind of working really well then, and also it's when the house is quiet, so I can throw out my microphones and
exactly
play some flutes or oboes or percussion or whatever. So
that's wonderful. That's really great. Jonathan, before we go, how can people find your music, stay up to date with your work? I know you have your website, but maybe share a little bit more about that.
JonathanWarmanmusic.com is my site. And then on Spotify, Jonathan Warman. And I'm on all the streaming platforms as far as I know for music. And then Instagram, Jonathan Warman Music. Yeah. And I'm going to try to start posting. I haven't posted very much in like 2 or 3 weeks. I'm going to try to do more. It's just so hard.
It's hard. It's same for me.
It's an extra job, dude.
It's an extra job. It really is.
And I don't know how some people have the bloody time to do it so often.
Well, they don't have responsibilities. I love this thing where like I don't post for like a week or two, and then I post something, and then I just I'm being very not I really don't care about it, but it's really funny the follower game where you post something and then you lose followers. Yeah. And then you start posting again and it goes up a little bit again. And then you post something 2 weeks later and then people
it's so
this constant battle.
It's so weird. And God, I love I do love being on social media. Because I'm new to it as of just like a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. Right. I just joined Instagram. Mm-hmm. And it's been so fun to meet so many awesome composers and people working in the field, and just like, this among many other things, it's just so cool to connect and like be like, oh man, what are you working on? What instrument is that? What is your mic placement? Or like constantly chit-chatting with people throughout the week. It's so cool.
It's very cool. I've been able to find all the artwork that I've had for my releases are from artists that I follow on Instagram. I literally just typed out, "Hey, I love your art. Where can I find? Where could we work?" And it's amazing how that's how powerful it is. And the other thing that's amazing is just how much talent there is. It's really amazing how much talent there is.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling, and I love. I'm not someone who's constantly trying to discover new music. I kind of let music just come to me when it has to. But lately, like I've been listening to some playlists. Like I have a really good friend of mine, Richard Villegas, who's like an awesome music collaborator, journalist based out of Mexico right now, and he has a website called Song Mess, and he does a lot of podcasting, really awesome work that he does. But he has this playlist that he constantly is updating, and it's just I've discovered so much music through him. So if Richard's listening, thank you, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. There's just so much talent. But yeah, if you use social media in that sense, it's very beneficial and advantageous. But
Yeah.
it's another job. Like I
Yeah.
recognize that too.
It's a time suck for sure. And I don't have the time to try to make everything look cool and stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
dude, I don't have the time. But yeah, some of the relationships I've created and formed, it's really cool. And like releasing that sleep record for my kid.
Yeah,
And if I wouldn't have done that, and my wife like really made me sign up for
good.
this, and I'm so glad she did. But I never would have met my label mates in Australia or Hong
Right.
Kong, or been
Exactly.
exposed to like all of these different, just composers and like
Yeah.
people who I was one or two people away from in real life. Now we are just like friends now and talk on a weekly basis, and
So cool.
it's so cool to collaborate with people. Just I wish I would have done it a long time ago.
Well, but you're doing it now.
Yes,
So
yeah, trying to.
exactly. Exactly. Trying to. All right, Senor. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. It's really been great to talk with you,
Thank you.
and we all look forward to hearing more from your exquisite ambient music, which it really is. To our listeners, thank you, gracias, and remember, be kind. Peace.